Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey, greetings from Peru. I'm here in the town of Aguascalientes right now and in Peru for a research trip preparing for my group tour that's next fall. And that tour is actually sold out, but if you're interested in future trips to Peru and the Galapagos or to other destinations, you can check them all out at wandertours.com. John's here with me, and we're just wrapping up our time in the country. It's been just a short trip, but we've completed the one-day Inca trail that ends at the ruins of Machu Picchu, and these were just amazing. We've all seen the pictures of Machu Picchu, but really photos do not do it justice. It's just amazing to walk around this incredible complex. It's just really mind-boggling. The one-day trek itself was relatively easy. It's just over like 9,000 feet at the highest altitude. But along the way, you see ruins, bird life, and just super dramatic landscape. And next year, I'm returning and I'll be doing the 4-day trek. With all the travel I've done, I am a bit baffled as to how this is my first trip to South America. In my backpacking years, most of my travels were to Southeast Asia, and really a lot of it, even to this day, is Southeast Asia. My one big trip through Central America was by motorcycle, where I finished in Panama. So I just never made it, any further south than Panama down into Colombia. And I'm kind of regretting it now, and especially since Spanish is the one language that I've studied most. So it's been kind of easy for me to get around and to communicate. It's just really been an amazing week here, and we've packed in a lot of touring in a short amount of time. And I know this has just been a taste of the culture, but it makes me now want to throw on a backpack and travel through South America really for 3 or 4 months. That's what I have on my mind. I don't know how practical that is, but it's certainly what I would love to do. Anytime I have a new experience and meet great people, I can't help but have this feeling that there's so much more to see and really never enough time to do it all. Today's guest, musician Laura Love, can surely relate to this feeling that there is no time to waste. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. I've been a fan of Laura's music for more than 20 years. When I discovered one of her first CDs, the Laura Love Collection from Putamayo. Her music is a fusion of sorts. It's been described as Afro-Celtic, but the depth of her lyrics and insight really remind me a lot of Tracy Chapman. Her music captured me way back when, and to this day I find myself humming the songs from that first CD that I just really fell in love with. So for many years, I've been a big fan from afar, and I only recently discovered that we have a mutual friend in common, and I was so excited to have the chance to sit down with Laura for this conversation. As I did a bit of research prior to us chatting, I was pretty floored by what I had read about her. Even having some background knowledge, there were things that came up when we recorded that I just wasn't prepared for. In short, I have to say that this conversation is heartbreaking. What Laura has been through, no person should have to endure. I've always found her lyrics to be really quite strong, and I was surprised to find that her childhood, and actually really into her adulthood, have been filled with unfathomable pain. And despite this, she is filled with laughter, as you'll hear, and she's got this outlook that the world is filled with love and kindness, and it's just amazing, really, considering her history, and you'll hear about that. Laura dives right into her origin story, and it is painful to listen to, but then she also talks about her career as a musician, including a performance at Carnegie Hall, like very early on in her career. And more recently, she's been struggling with depression and the loss of someone very close to her, and she talks about that very openly as well. I am so grateful to have had this conversation with one of my favorite musicians, and I can't express enough gratitude for the fact that she was so willing to be open with me. I have to forewarn you that this is a rough conversation to listen to because her stories are unimaginable. please do listen through to the end because it ends on a really beautiful note. If you're already a Laura Love fan and, like me, you weren't aware of her tragic history, you might be as surprised as I was. I think it will make you want to re-listen to her songs, and it will definitely be with a new appreciation. If you're not yet a Laura Love fan, hopefully you will be after listening to this episode. She sings a bit, and she gives us just a taste of her talent. I'll link to her recordings in the show notes, as well as her GoFundMe page, which she's using to fund the recording of her next CD. So old fans, new fans, I hope you'll all be moved to support this amazing woman. You can also find her GoFundMe page just by Googling Laura Love and GoFundMe, and that page is going to come right up at the top. So with that, here's Laura Love.
I just had coffee, so just had...
You had coffee right now.
Just right now. And so I'm not a eat right as I get up kind of person. I got to kind of be invested in the day before I really commit to, the kinds of foods that I like.
That's interesting. What are the kinds of foods that you like?
Heavy pastries.
Oh.
I don't eat that much sweet stuff. I, kind of an eggs and meat. I'm from Nebraska, so, just think of what
You're a meat and potatoes kind of gal.
Potatoes kind of gal.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
So what is your typical breakfast where you live?
Well, I'm actually not that much of a breakfast eater either. I kind of just like from about noon to 6, that's the zone, that I eat. And I just, in the winter, it's pretty bad. It's a lot of, breads and meats and things like that aren't good for me. But in the summer, I garden. And so I grow a lot of my food in the summer. So I had a lot of produce and green beans and, salad stuff and just a lot of arugula and, I just love to graze in the garden, carrots and all that. So I eat much better.
Does your interest in gardening come directly from your time in Nebraska?
No, I never was in the country in Nebraska. My mother was she was mentally ill, and so she was in and out of a lot of institutions, and so she was paranoid schizophrenic, and so we didn't get out much, and so the places where I didn't even really know Lincoln, Nebraska, where I grew up that well because, she tended to keep us all cloistered in the house. And so we ended up reading a lot. And I would read about gardening and I would read about growing stuff and I would read about the outdoors. Like My Side of the Mountain was like a huge book for me when I was a little kid, just to imagine living outdoors and finding things to eat in the trees and on the ground. And so...
How many siblings were there?
I had one sister.
And I know, let's get that out of the way. I know she died recently. I'm very sorry about that.
She killed herself in March, and that's been really hard. It's been really hard, but there are some beautiful things that have come from it too. I live much more intentionally now, and I feel like I'm very, very focused on being kinder and more patient particularly with people who I may have been impatient with before because they seemed needy or they seemed insecure, and I'm much more likely to try to draw that out and give them a safe place to be, geeky or nerdy or insecure, socially awkward, those kinds of things, the things that my sister was. I saw firsthand how a person gets there. And so...
Were you intolerant of that before, or impatient with that?
I was at times. And if I could just have those seconds back, those days, those years... it's a kind of a complicated story. I was telling you I come from a long line of light-skinned black people dating all the way back to slavery. And my mother and my father are very light-skinned people. They're both black, but they're light-skinned. And I came out lighter than they did, and Lisa came out darker. And we have the same mother and father. So my mother resented her skin and her hair.
Because it outed her.
It outed her. And so, she was always telling, and my mother was mentally ill, so she was vicious at times, just cruel. She was... It was hard for her to have children, and be a paranoid schizophrenic, because children are just by nature social beings and want to get out and explore the world. And
was she medicated at that time? That was a while ago.
Yeah, she had been in mental institutions and hospitals, and they gave her shock treatments. And shock treatments then weren't like they are now. They were really, really, there was a lot of juice.
They're what we would see in the movies,
exactly.
Kind of those horror things.
Right.
Yeah.
And they would give the treatments to both hemispheres of the brain at the same time. And often there was even more damage and, irreparable damage. And so my sister was kicked by the world because she was darker. We grew up in the 60s during the height of the civil rights movement. And so she was called nigger all the time, and just horrible things, happened to her that I was spared when I was not with her.
What was the split in your difference, your age difference?
We were a year apart. And so, 13 months. And because my mother was mentally ill and we were, cooped up in these, tiny little spaces, and my mother would just chain smoke, she and I had to entertain ourselves. And I always felt, I learned early on to kick her the same way that my mother did. My mother was always, you're so black and evil, and your hair is ugly, and you're fat, and you're stupid, and you're lazy, and and she had insults and things that she would say to me that were horrible as well. But the kinds of things that she directed at my sister were telling, in that they were so racist in our own home. And she taught me early on. I mean, the things that the kinds of insults that she would hurl at me were more that I'm almost jealous, she would call me a little honky sometimes, and she would say things that were, you think you're so cute, and so there was a lot of ways to be wrong.
Yeah.
But
she was angry at you also.
Yeah, because we made her life harder, and we reminded her that she had had a sort of a failed love affair with a man who was already married and had 2 of his children, while he had children by his wife that they were the same age. My mother and his wife were pregnant at the same time, and so. And I look a lot like my father, and my sense of humor, I think, is a lot like his. And I think those were the things that she kind of kicked me for. And the things that she resented Lisa for were more your hair, your skin, you're not clever, you're not, so I learned to kick Lisa too. Those are the things that I can't bear. I can't bear that I was unkind, and that.
Were you close with her in more recent years?
It's funny. We didn't see each other every day. We didn't see each other all that often, and we didn't even talk that much. Maybe 4 or 5 times a year. But I loved Lisa with all my heart, and each year as I've grown older, I realize, you have to get some years on you to really understand the levels of dysfunction and maybe depravity in your own household, in your own life, and how.
Why does that take so long?
I don't know. I didn't even know my mom was crazy. I mean, I just thought, well, she's not going to go for that.
When did you realize that there was a real medical issue?
Well, I was like in my 20s really before. I mean, it's just like, yeah, mom had, back then they called them nervous breakdowns. And I'd say, well, mom had a nervous breakdown. Or, my mom's really strict, or my mom doesn't like us to go out. But it was in my 20s really before I realized, and I knew she had gone to the mental hospital, and I knew that we had been in orphanages and foster homes and things like that. But it was, I was well into my 20s before I realized she had a real diagnosis, and, because she was crazy. She wasn't dumb. I mean, she was very intelligent, and it was always other people that were conspiring to, knock her down a peg or to, and she would just explain to us. We grew up in Catholic churches, and the stuff that paranoid schizophrenics say is not that different from Catholic doctrine. It's like, you better get right or you're going to hell. And,
my goodness.
And the guilt, and, she would tell us that she was God's wife. The reason we didn't have a father was, because, Jesus had chosen her to be his wife. And I was like, well, it's not that far away from the stuff that the teachers are telling, the nuns are telling me at school,
So it wasn't until your 20s that you really realized that there was something there, like you said, that there was something medically
there was
wrong
an
there.
extra element of nuts, in there.
How did music come into your life? Now, your dad was a musician.
My father was a jazz saxophonist, and he played with Count Basie's band, and he played all over the world, played jazz saxophone. And
did you know him?
Well, see, this is the thing. My mother, she didn't want us to know that we were, the bastard children of a man who was like, just a playa, So she told us that she had an idyllic marriage and that he had died in a car accident when we were babies. And so we had this perfect father growing up, that just happened to be dead, And so
do you think it was better to think that?
I see the value in it now. I really do. Because and also at that time, we were living in all white neighborhoods and going to Catholic school, and we were the only black kids in the whole school, to just be like, the illegitimate kids of a jazz musician.
Right.
That's just like,
that would have been tougher.
That's just too what people expected anyway, So,
when did you find out who your dad was?
Well, my sister and I, when I was 16 and she was 17, decided we were going to move out because my mom was headed for another big crash. We knew that she was, by this time we kind of knew the patterns and everything, and that she was, going nuts. And so I had told Lisa, I said, we need to get ourselves some jobs, and we need to salt that money away. And this time we're not going to foster homes. We're going to we're going to get our own apartment.
Was she older or younger than you?
She was a year older, but she just let me be the oldest. I mean, I was always kind of the boss and the ringleader, and she was so sweet. She never turned all those kicks and all that meanness and that even I delivered to her. She never turned it into meanness. She was just the sweetest, guileless. And it was only in like the last few years that I began to understand how I contributed to her sadness and her depression, and how I was emotionally unavailable to her, and how I sort of had this contempt and disdain that I just carried on. When my mom stopped insulting her and teaching me how to do it, then I just kept it up. And it's like, I don't have to do that. And so I was just starting to really tell her how much I loved her, and and then she's gone. She, when I was 6, my mother hung herself in front of us. She's just stepped off a chair. And we were in a basement apartment, and it was a low ceiling. She stepped off, it was just barely enough for her to even get clearance. And she stepped off, and she was hanging there, and my sister and I screamed and yelled and held her up, and screamed so much that the woman who lived upstairs, we were living in a basement apartment in her house, came down, and she was sort of a babysitter. She was running a daycare, and she was having like an open house for the kids, and for their kids' parents. It was a Sunday. I know. Fun, huh? Fun. Hey kids, it's a teachable moment. Here, never put things around your neck and jump.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So we were screaming and hollering. We held her up, and she lived. She lived. She hadn't broken her neck. And, here, 57 years later, that's exactly how my sister,
Oh, she did.
She's the same thing. She didn't break her neck. There was hardly any clearance. She just sort of willed her way into not like trying to stand up, kind of, it's just, it would have been so easy but she was very committed to doing that. And
so at 16, you encourage her to take off.
I encourage her to take off, and we leave. And we were, feeling our independence and thinking, oh my gosh, we're out from under, we're out of crazy town, and we were just feeling. And so we were looking for a movie to go to, and I said, there's this guy named...
That was the first thing you did, was go to a movie?
Well, no, that wasn't the first thing we did. Well, that's another story. We ended up being evicted for being black in that particular apartment because... anyway, that's a different story. But so we, like our first weekend or, maybe the second weekend when we were looking for a movie to go to, and we looked in the newspaper entertainment section, it said, Preston Love, world-renowned jazz saxophonist, playing tonight at the Zoo Bar. And, we lived in a college town, Lincoln, Nebraska, capital city. And I was like, Preston Love, huh? That's our father. And
so how did you know it was your father?
She told us, our mother had told us told us his name.
Oh, she told you his name,
Yeah.
but she said that he
That
was
he
dead.
had died, and during those years, the whole time I was growing up, he had moved to Los Angeles to be one of the people who ran Motown when they moved from Detroit to Los Angeles. So there was no real danger. We weren't in the black community.
Right.
We were, so nobody was going to tell us, your dad's not dead. He's living, in Omaha, whatever. He had moved back. He had moved back to Omaha, Nebraska, just the next town over, and was coming to play my town. And which couldn't make sense of that. And I just thought, well, maybe the band kept his name after he died. What? So we went down there, and sure enough, there's a guy up there playing saxophone who looks just like me.
No kidding.
Yeah. And I was like, yep.
Did you talk to him afterwards?
Yeah. Well, on his break, And
I bet that was a good idea.
Yeah, it was a really good idea. Well, it's like we kind of had to get all the little college students, the girls that were like all around him, and he just kind of looked at me like I was one of them, one of his adoring fans. And then I said the stupidest thing. I said, "Are you Preston Love?" And he'd been playing for like an hour and saying, "I'm Preston Love." So yeah, and he said, yeah. And I said, "Did you ever know a Winnie Winston?" Yeah. And I said, "Well, how well?" and then he said, "Which one are you, Lisa or Laura?" Yeah.
So he knew about you too.
Yeah.
And did you stay in touch with him after that?
I did. I thought, oh my God, everything's going to be okay. We're going to be like the Waltons. We're going to have these, great, lives, Brady Bunch kind of. But he was very arrogant, and he had very little connection to these women that he got pregnant. I mean, it's like every few years I run into another sister or brother. My niece, my sister's daughter, the other day said, "Aunt Laurie, I just went through Ancestor.com and you have another sister." And so, this is like 3 weeks ago. And so throughout my life, I've met many, many siblings. And so it's not that, special or unique anymore. And the only one I want is Lisa. That's the one I know,
Yeah.
and I love. But
So you got, so you have that music connection.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a singer or interested in music before?
I loved music. My mom had been a singer in his band. And so, because when he wasn't, touring, with the other bands, and he had his own Preston Love Orchestra. And my mother sang in that band. It takes a while for just full-blown schizophrenia and stuff to really kick in. And I think it was after our births that it really got really bad for her. But at the time, she was just a little odd, but she was brilliant. And
was she singing around the house at that time? Is that where you picked it up?
Yeah, she would sing these, I remember just her, that was like one of the, and she sang Girl from Ipanema, and she would sing, "King Jesus led the children to the waterside to see the little children getting truly baptized. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb. Oh, run along, children, and be baptized. Mighty pretty meeting at the waterside. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb." This is happy words, huh? So she would sing those things around the house, and my sister and I would love it. And we'd have, just be like, but she'd kind of shut it down when we would join in, because she was like, don't you be, singers and go out.
Did you feel like you were a natural talent at that time?
I didn't know. But my sister and I really loved to sing together. And sometimes we got to sing with Mom, but she would shut that down. Like, don't you ever try to, make your living as singers and meet bastard men,
Yeah. No, I had read that you sang, was it in a talent concert?
Yeah.
And that was kind of your debut
when I was 12.
When
I was 12, my junior high, I sang Anticipation.
Yeah.
Anticipation is making me wait. Like making me late is keeping me waiting. Yeah. And, and up until that time, I'd been my mom, we moved all the time. And so I'd been to, in the 4th grade, I think I was in 4 or 5 different schools, and I'd been in all these, we never got to be in the same place for very long, because that's, mentally ill people don't have a lot of stability. And so here I was in the 7th grade, just trying to, it's like, and then I entered this little talent contest, and I sang, anticipation. And it was like, God, it was like 0 to hero, just boom, right
No
then.
kidding.
It set up my whole 3 years of junior high. I was like everything. I was like one of the cool kids, just like overnight, you know. And
did you do anything else with your singing at that point? Were you in the chorus, or did you do any other talent shows?
No, I mean, I was just like sort of in glee class and stuff like that. I mean, my real passion was athletics. You know, I was like into gymnastics, and I was a city trampoline champ, you know, for like 3 years. And, you know, I just wanted to just like be a little jock, you know, and singing was okay. Lisa, it was her passion was music. Lisa's passion was music. And, you know, God, I remember 1969, we had these little transistor radios, and she goes, Laurie, that song, you know, and it was boo, 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 boo. You know, it was like,
oh,
you know,
yeah, Michael Jackson.
Yeah, you know, I want you back. And then there was like, you know, oh my God. And I just could not believe that was a boy. I said, that can't be a boy. That can't be a boy, you know. A, B, C, it's easy. It's like counting 1 to 3, you know. And it was like, oh my God. She, you know, she brought me all the music. I was patient enough with music, but she was just crazy for it.
Well, how did it find your way into your life as a career, really?
Well, you know, 1976, we'll fast forward to Lisa and I had just gotten our apartment, and we were going to school getting really good grades because we didn't want anyone to know that we were on our own. And so we didn't want to go to foster homes again. So we actually became model citizens and, you know, students, and, you know, never were late to school, never missed a day. And so I was in my glee class, and I was just sitting there, and these guys came to my glee teacher, Mr. Scoot Khan. It was spelled like Scutcheon, Skutchan, but he was putting on airs. He said it was Scoot Khan. Anyway, so these guys came, and they were talking to my glee teacher, and then he pulled me aside, and it was just so weird. This was like before gunmen would come in and, you know, like shoot up a classroom. So you could just, these two young white men could just come to the classroom and say, hey man, you know, and they said they had a grant to do music in the prisons, and it wasn't a very big grant. So they were looking in the high schools to see if there were any kids anyone who could sing Aretha Franklin and Shaka Khan and things like that. And Mr. Scoot Khan said, well, you know, Laura over there is a pretty good singer. They said, okay. And so that was my very first gig at 16 years old. I sang in the Nebraska State Penitentiary.
Did you just feel like you were just like on top of the world? Not because it was in the penitentiary, but just because someone had singled you out as a wonderful voice. And maybe were you feeling like, oh yeah, like this is really where my heart is?
I thought it was amazing, and I got $50. I mean, that's still good music these days, good money, you know, in the music.
Sadly, I know. Yeah.
And it was just like, you know, and I got, you know, I mean, I just remember, you know, RESPCT, you know, I got to sing that, and I'll be good to you, you know, just all kind of stuff. And it was a horn band, you know, it had on the way into, it was like a big band, like half the horn section got arrested, and because they had done a gig in Iowa, Council Bluffs, Iowa, the night before, and they still had their weed in their horn cases, and so some of them didn't get in, and they got arrested at the gig, and it was like, oh my God, and I was terrified because I'd never sung in front of people, like, and I was just, you know, actually, this is so sad, I was actually wearing gingham. I didn't even, it's like
into the prison.
I mean, I was just like, it didn't, you know, it was like, there was nothing hot about what I was wearing. I would just think, oh my God. And you know, the prisoners, I think they're like, look at her, she just trembling, you know, and like, she looked like my little girl. Oh, look at her, she's so scared, you know. And so they were actually nice, and they brought me coffee. I didn't even drink coffee, you know. And so, yeah. And then, so I just trembled my way through it. But then, you know, afterwards I was just like, and they were, all these prisoners were like, good job. You know, oh, honey, that was really good. You know, they were so sweet to me. And so I just remember thinking, you know, there's something to this.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So then what brought you to your first record?
Well, Leroy Critcher, the guy that was the leader of that band who had come to my glee teacher, I said, well, let's do some more gigs, you know. So we did. Then he and I sort of fell in love. But he was older than I was. So anyhow, when I was, you know, 19, Leroy and I moved in together.
How old was he?
He was 27.
Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't like a huge amount older than. So anyway, and then he says, you know, I gotta get out of Lincoln, Nebraska. I just, you know, he was a jazz guitarist, and, you know, he could play anything, but he wanted to move to Portland, Oregon. And I said, yeah, let's go. And at the time I was in college by that time. I had just done my first semester at the University of Nebraska. And I was during the Carter administration. I was going to school on a BEOG, Basic Educational Opportunity Grant, and it was like a free college. And I just thought, oh well, we'll just wherever we go, I'll still have free college. So I moved to Portland, Oregon, with him. Then Reagan got in, and it was like, oh, you're not going to school anymore. So I ended up just going to work and singing.
So he did away with all those college.
Everything. Everything was just done. I mean, it really matters who the president is. All the social programs that had been my safety net sort of disappeared, and so the work study program, all that stuff, just gone. I just became a working person that sang in bands whenever I could. So that's what got me to the West Coast.
Okay. So in Portland, you're working a job and just kind of putting music on the back burner,
and I thought, and I promised my high school English teacher that I would, pursue my education, because she was like, music is for losers, kind of thing. And, or music is for paupers, actually, is what she was.
For paupers. Yeah.
I mean, when a school teacher tells you that music is going to, make you stay poor, you got to listen to that, because, they're not pulling down a lot of dough. And so anyways, I was, hoping to get back to college at some point. And so I was just singing and stuff and just doing whatever I had to do, but I wasn't really suited for a day job.
Right. Oh, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
So what led you to the first album then?
Oh, well, I just kept on doing my little thing and everything. And then
doing your little thing, meaning you were playing in clubs, like in Portland?
Yeah, whatever I could.
That's
or
a
open
good
mics.
environment for that, isn't
it was
that?
at the time.
Yeah.
Portland and Seattle were very different places. They were just little hippie enclaves that weren't real cities, and they were okay with that.
With great coffee shops and open
mics, and and places where you could get a house, like a huge 4 or 5 bedroom house for like $400, $500 a month, and all your friends could live. It was just really a different situation. I quit the job at their insistence.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, did she jump or was she pushed? Yeah, so and then I decided, so I went on tour with this little top 40 cover band, and it was like, ugh, that was a horrible life. And I thought, maybe I should write my own songs, maybe I should go back. So I got back into college, and at some point, and then I decided, I know what I did. I started growing marijuana to get back into college, because there was no grant program.
Yeah.
And so by this time, I'd sort of migrated up north from Portland, and I was living in Seattle. And so I just said,
And you left the guy down in Portland.
I left the guy.
Okay.
Well, yeah, that was another thing. Laura, you got to kind of grow up, get out, go up, go away.
That's another instance.
That was another instance where
were you pushed? Or?
Yeah, where I got up and I left it. Because he asked me to.
Yeah.
So then I got to Seattle, and everyone was growing pot, and I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty good job for somebody.
Pretty lucrative.
Yeah, pretty good job. So I did that, and then was still doing kind of bands whenever I could, and then CDs came out, right? And it occurred to me that I could just fund my own CD. So I got into my own little grunge band in like 1987. I was like 26, years old. And then through the miracle of marijuana cultivation, I was able to put myself through college. So I finished up at the University of Washington, because I promised
You paid for your college at the UW through pot growing.
Yeah. But it was like $500 a quarter, like for like 15 credits,
So you weren't like having to make tens of thousands of dollars on the street corner.
Oh, no.
Okay, because that would be stressful.
That would be stressful. No, I had I'd say 50 plants, and I had them in my basement, and you would just sell to one person, sort of wholesale. And so, yeah. And it's funny thing is I've never smoked pot. I mean, I have, of course, tried it and everything, but I've never been a pot smoker. But I just think it's just a wonderful thing to have around your house. I mean, it just smells good, and it, the people that you give it to are so
happy.
They're so happy, and they're just.
You were just making people happy.
I was just making people happy. It was
funny.
So that I financed my first album through that.
And what was the name of that?
Well, the band was called Boom Boom GI, and the first album we did two. It was called Slide a Little Closer. And then the second one
Was that all original material that you had written?
I hadn't written it. I was trying to just learn. I wanted to learn how to play bass, and so I was kind of the singer in that band. And I had maybe co-written a little bit with the writer guy, Scott Barr. But I came in as a bass player. I wanted to learn how to play bass. I thought I was an okay singer, but I didn't really. But then our bass player just devoted her life to, or our singer devoted her life to heroin. And so they were like, well, Laura, you got to play bass and sing. And I said, are you kidding? But that's what I ended up doing. So
yeah, and that was natural. That was probably natural for
you.
Yeah. So, and from Boom Boom GI to...
Well, through the miracle of education, I started really learning. I took some women's studies class, ethnic studies and things like that. And I started learning about all the isms. And I thought, I could write songs about these things. And, because it was, the classes were stimulating and exciting and everything, but I just wish they'd sing it to me or something to make it a little easier. Because, I'm not a really fast reader, and so I actually write faster than I read, like when I'm writing I've written a couple of books now, and I don't literally write faster than I read, but I mean, writing comes easily to me, and reading, because I have just, my attention wanders, and I'm just sort of, I guess, ADD, and so, but at any rate, so one of my senior project, one of the things that they wanted me to do for my women's studies class was you had a choice between writing, I think it was like a 20-page paper, or performing a concert of your original music. And bingo, you know which one I choose.
Yeah.
so that, and then through that, I sent that, it was a cassette tape, and it was called Menstrual Hut.
Writing about feminism.
Yeah, right. So it's destined to be top 10 hit. So I sent that to the Michigan Women's Festival and to some feminist publications, and boom, then I was a musician. They invited me to come play at the Michigan Women's Festival. I put a band together.
At that time, did you think, yeah, this is now my career? Or were you still thinking, oh, I'm going to still need to do something else, and this is a side hustle?
Well, I enjoyed growing pot. And so I thought, well, it's nice to have some visible means of support other than that. So that was pretty good. Mm-hmm. So I was doing both.
And you landed a gig at Carnegie Hall, right?
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, it was odd. It wasn't like Laura Love at Carnegie Hall. What happened there was, okay, so...
But it sounds much better if I say, you landed
I landed a gig at Carnegie Hall, yes, yes, Well, that was a really strange thing. Someone on the East Coast had gotten hold of Menstrual Hut, right? And I, by this time, was, doing my music a little bit, and growing my pot. And I had just gotten this, a new manager at the time who said, she had a band called Ranch Romance in Seattle.
I remember those folks.
Yeah. They were great band. Anyhow, all girl cowgirl band, and so anyway, so she had seen me a couple of times because I had opened, for festivals and stuff where Ranch Romance was. So I was doing my little thing. So she said, I'll manage you a little bit. I wanted her to manage me a little bit more, actually. I was kind of really crushed out on her. And so that was fine. I got her to notice me. And so we were actually living together, and she was, getting me gigs and everything. Oh, by this time I'd been arrested for growing pot. Yes. Caught myself a little felony, but at least I had my degree, my college degree.
Did you do time for that?
No, I didn't do it. They just wanted, I owned a house, and they wanted to seize the house and all, the guitars and my car and stuff like that. So
did you lose everything?
I did at the time, but I got some of it back, and oh well, I mean, not like I worked that hard to get it. So I'm there with my manager, and she gets a phone call, and it's a guy named Dan Storper, who now has a record company called Putamayo Records, and
a little record company.
yeah, Putamayo Records, and he has an NPR show too, a syndicated show. Anyway, it was Dan Storper, and he said, my girlfriend just put this cassette in my hands, and she says that she's been, following you for a number of years, and by this time I had my first album, my first CD, Pangea, and so he says, my girlfriend gave me this thing, and I'm wanting to sort of focus. Putamayo was a clothing store. He had 3 Putamayo stores in Manhattan.
Okay,
in New York City.
I didn't realize they started out as clothing.
Clothes, because he was a world traveler, and he would bring clothes from all over the world, from places, and try to, get get these people some way to make a living by selling their clothes in, New York City. Anyway, so he says, I really love this record. And he says, well, I want to do a benefit for the homeless. And I want to have this benefit in Carnegie Hall. And so I've got some people that are he says, I have 28 people that I want. It was a two disc CD compilation, and people that are, were known, mostly known, but certainly better known than I was. I mean, I was just, and he said, so would you come to Carnegie Hall? And I was like, yeah, I guess,
Yeah, twist my arm.
Yes, but I'd never been in New York City. I'd hardly been any place but Nebraska and Portland and Seattle, and I said, okay. And so I said, well, I'll get the band together. He said, oh no, it's fast turnovers. Everybody was going to, we're going to have 14 people in the first half and 14 on the second half. And you get one song. I said, but I play bass, it's not like I can just get up there and play my bass. And he said, well, that's what you're going to have to do. So I was the last person on the first set before the intermission. And I remember just thinking God, I just felt like such a geek. I walked out there and I had overalls on.
Did you have your bass?
I had my bass. I had overalls on, and I just remember walking out just thinking, oh my God, because I'd seen all these great singers and songwriters, and they would have their guitars, and some people played piano, and they're great original music. And I got out there and I was like, oh my God, just get this over with and try to live it down, in the remaining years, And so I started doing my song, and I heard all this rustling, and I thought, shit, people are going to the exits. They're going to go get there in the lobby and get their drinks or whatever. And I realized people, were starting to clap along, and they were standing up and clapping. And by the time
this was an original song?
It's called I'm a Given Way. I'm a window, I'm a crutch, and I'm a living wage. I'm a coat and I'm a glove and I'm a turning page. I'm a seawall rising up just to keep your houses dry. But I'm giving way, oh, I'm a giving way. It was kind of a song about sort of strong things collapsing, structures collapsing, sort of the weak inheriting the earth and kind of thing. It was just like sort of a class struggle kind of song. Anyway, so I ended the song, and everybody was on their feet and they were just screaming, and I was just overwhelmed by the response. And then my manager and I went into the lobby, and we were just mobbed, and there were like record company people. The New York Times was there, and the next day the New York Times, the entertainment section said Laura Love stole the show, and that was it. I was on a major label.
I'm just getting chills.
Yeah.
That's so amazing.
Yeah.
And I know that song well, too, so that's really nice to hear you sing it.
Thank you. Well, that was it. That was a song, and then I was on Mercury Records, and that was it. I was sort of had a career and started getting hired for all these festivals. And
you probably don't remember this, but what year was that? Maybe 1994, and you might correct me on it, but you were with me. I took a bus from Mexico City to Guatemala. We were together the whole time on the bus.
I remember it now. I was on a disc. I was on that little round disc. And
you weren't. You were on a tape.
I was on that little tape.
Yeah.
And I remember.
I was
yes.
on, you were in my Sony Walkman tape.
Oh,
and I had to keep flipping it over. And I rode that bus from Mexico City to Guatemala. And I listened to that on this terrible bus ride the whole way.
Thanks for taking me with you.
Oh yeah, and it was the Laura Love collection.
Oh yeah, gosh.
So I know all those songs.
Oh, the Putamayo collection.
Yeah, the Putamayo one. Yeah,
I was the first person on his label.
Were you really?
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
Me and he liked this other guy, Doogie McLean, and Doogie McLean and I were the first.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah,
so that's great. I have very fond.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we had a good time, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. I'll have to send you a postcard from that.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. Yeah. Wow. And so you just played a gig last night in Seattle, which I heard was wonderful, and I have to check out. I'm so sorry that I missed it.
Oh, it's all right. You've had a busy life.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy right now, but when you come back, definitely I will see you. You have, I hear through the grapevine, that you've got some new kind of a new path or some new songs that you're working on with a new theme to it.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
I was sort of semi-retired in the Methow Valley. I lived in West Seattle for many years, and I loved it here. My life, I've always, since I read, My Side of the Mountain, I just kind of wanted to live out in the wilderness kind of. And I have no experience with that or anything, but I've always loved being outdoors. And so I thought, well, and I had done well with music. And while I really love playing and singing music, I didn't really enjoy the travel that much, and just the trying to stay healthy and well, and living in planes, trains, and automobiles. And so bought some land in the Methow Valley.
You didn't buy that with your pot money?
No. By that, then
okay, good.
I had music money.
Okay,
I had
good.
music monies then, visible means of support. So I know pot was
making
good to
an
me.
honest living.
Yeah, making an honest living. Although I always thought
now you can make an honest living in Washington State growing pot.
You can certainly grow pot. I don't know if you can make an honest living because there's certainly, there's a lot of good things about having it be illegal. The prices are way up, and things like that. So I've had where I live, there are a lot of pot growers, and they're all just sort of selling their incredible bud for like, $800 a pound, It's like a quarter of what, we made when it was illegal. So I sort of was happy, and in semi-retirement, I had 80 acres and out in the Methow and, Okanagan County, we had, wolves and cougars and bears and moose and on our land. And I was growing my own food, and I grew wheat.
Oh my gosh.
And hand threshed it.
Wow.
And do you know how freaking hard it is?
I can imagine.
Yeah. To get like 5 pounds of wheat, like if you're threshing it and throwing it up in the air and winnowing it and having the wind blow the chaff away, it's a lot of work. Each of these little wheat kernels is the size of like a piece of rice, but anyway, so I did that. I was really enjoying it. And by this time I lived with 2 women, my 2 exes. It's complicated.
That's a story for next podcast.
Next podcast. So I was living with 2 women, and one of them had been born and raised out there, and she was just like a cowgirl. But anyway, I sort of came to where I was supporting her and her whole family, and they were pretty racist. They called me the colored girl, and they would sort of order me around, and they all sort of moved in on me. And I was my sort of utopian retirement dream was it was just crumbling, and I was just trying to find a way to make sense out of it. And so one day, I went and I confronted her, and I said, look, this has got to stop. Your whole family's living with us for 15 years. You guys are ordering me around like I'm your servant. I'm paying for everything. We got to talk. And she assaulted me, and she beat me pretty bad. She beat me badly. And after she beat me, the manager that I was also living with, one of my ex, came down, and she said, who do you think you are? She's volatile. She doesn't have a lot of tools in her toolbox, stressed out because, her sister had moved in with us, and her sister was a lot. And her sister actually had a home, but just liked being at our place because I was the servant and I was paying for it all. And so after I was beaten, my manager blamed me for not having read that it wasn't a good time to talk with this woman about running all over us. And she says, why did you confront her? Why did you? Well, I didn't want to get beat up, but I had to, it was just too much.
Yeah, you'd had it.
I'd had it. And so I said, well, I think I need to go to the doctor or the hospital or call the police. And she says, oh no, we need you to do your gigs. You don't call anybody. So I didn't. And then 4 days later, she called and said that I had attacked her. She and her family said the colored girl went nuts, and she threatened to kill us, which couldn't have been farther from the truth. Never happened. And 3 white sheriffs came out, and they arrested me, and they put me in jail. So for 2 years I was battling 4th degree domestic violence charges. And they said, well, you should have called. When they came to the house, they said, what happened to you? Because I was all beat up, and the only marks she had on her were black and blue knuckles from pounding on me. And they said, that's their story. And there's, and her family hadn't even been there. It was just she and I. And my manager was mad that I had brought this on us. So I went to jail for 3 days, and that threw me into a 2-year depression. And so I was battling in court for 2 years, and they've finally, the judge just said, look, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. They wanted to take everything that I owned, but they didn't have to, because I'd put them on the deeds to all the properties and was paying for everything. But they wanted to establish that I had committed a criminal act, and they wanted to take everything. So the judge basically just said, this is ridiculous. They didn't show up for court, because they couldn't defend the story. It was just made up. By those 2 years had passed, I was deeply in debt. I was depressed. I was realizing, oh my God, either I'm going to, I was just lightly tethered to the world. My cats were about the only thing that were keeping me alive. And then Terry Hunt, the guitar player I'm playing with now, he has a cover band in that area, and he said, come on, Laura, you got to get out of bed. He would travel, and I was court ordered to stay away. So here I was paying for all of their opulence, and I was in a little rat-infested cabin, no drinkable running water, 1 car battery for electricity, no internet. It was.
But Terry pulled you out.
He pulled me out, and he got me back working again. And so then I said, well, Terry, I got to kind of get some real gigs. And so I ended up calling all these festivals that I used to work, and they all hired me.
Of course they did.
It was amazing. They said, well, where have you been? And so Philadelphia Folk Festival.
When was that?
This was last February.
Oh, so just very recently.
Very, very recently.
February 2017 or 16?
2016. And so, no, February 2017. It was 2017 because, it was last February 2017. And so I was singing the new songs about sort of that I'd written about being, what had happened to me. And so we did our first little tour, and it was a wonderful thing. This was before the festivals hired me. It was like we did a little 4 or 5 gig dates tour in California, and through the strengths of that's how we got the festivals for this following summer. But anyway, so February, got my toe in the water, got back in, and I thought, okay, I'm invested in staying here and being in the world. And then in March, my sister killed herself. So that hasn't even been a year. So that's been hard. It's been really, really hard. It's been so hard. But
do you feel after your sister's death, do you feel even more invested? Like, I'm here and I have to make my mark, and I have to get my shit together.
Yeah.
Or are you on the brink of like sliding back?
Both of those things. Sometimes, sometimes I feel so hopeful and optimistic, and all those times that I was thinking, that I just wanted to kill myself when I was after the assault. And then my sister gets to it first, and it's just was like 2 out of 3 of us have, hung ourselves. And so it's like, but I couldn't do that to her kids. I could, her adult kids. And, her daughter was expecting her first baby, had her baby 11 days after my sister killed herself. And I mean, we all treasured Lisa. We treasured her. After my mom stopped kicking her and insulting her, and the world stopped insulting her and calling her niggers, she would just call herself that. I mean, she,
it gets ingrained.
It gets ingrained.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'd say today is sort of a mix between wild optimism and love for the world, and a feeling that kindness is the only answer, and kindness and forgiveness, and not having vengeance or bitterness, and I am committed to that all the time. And also thinking, God, when'll it end?
So when you have a when will it end moment, how do you pull yourself out?
The cats, my cats. I love my cats. They give me a lot of joy. How
many cats do you have?
Well, I had 3. And now I'm down to 2.
Okay.
So, but I used to have 14.
I was going to say you don't have 9, and you're a crazy cat lady.
Well, I would 14. Be if I could. But where I live now, there's animals that would just pick them off, and I just can't stand that. So I really manage the cats that I have. So I let them out certain hours, and and bring them in at night and all that stuff. So it's hard. It would be hard to do that with 14 cats, And so, but that's how many I had. If I'd have cats, I'd have bobcats, I'd have cougars, if I had my druthers, I am a crazy cat lady, but I manage it. So
other than living with the cats, are you living with anyone else?
No, I'm just trying to learn the lesson.
What's the lesson?
The lesson is being present. The lesson is to be kind. The lesson is to love fragile, delicate people. The lesson is to not be bitter. The lesson is to tell everyone, even people you don't know that you love, that tell them that you love them. Not let maybe being in some sort of relationship mask or be the thing that distracts us from doing what we're supposed to do, which is share our precious gifts. Every day I want to be with Lisa. I want to see her again every day. And I hope I do see her again. And I hope I see some of these 14 cats that are, that have all died of old age, and I'm down to 2, But the lesson is be here now. Do as much as we can. Don't be bitter. Forgive, forgive, forgive. Love, love, kindness, even in these times. And
even more so in these times.
And that blame and anger have no place in growth. So I've had this GoFundMe campaign for the last months, and it's funny. So the songs that I had been writing before Lisa's death were sort of about coming from this assault and learning, sort of redemption, and finding that I really, whenever I entertain fantasies of vengeance or getting even, or just them feeling the things that they had, the betrayal and the sadness and depression that I felt they had caused me. Whenever I felt those things, whenever I entertained those notions, I felt worse. And so it showed, I was just like, listen to that, watch that, and realize that they don't have anything to do with how I feel now. And it's up to me to not let that define me, and to not let that make me bitter or want them, any bad things to happen to them. And so that was the lesson. So those were the kinds of songs I was writing. And then after Lisa killed herself, I kind of switched midstream and started writing songs more about how precious, she is and she was. And what I've learned from her. And so my GoFundMe campaign was called Sad Songs. And Terry Hunt says, I don't know that that's your best.
You need a marketing lesson, maybe.
Yeah. So he and his adult children suggested When Lisa Smiles.
Yeah.
And so that's the name of the record. So it should be coming out here pretty soon.
And your GoFundMe campaign is still
up and running.
Okay, great. What I'll do is I'll link to that in the show notes.
Okay.
And encourage people to donate with that. Maybe we'll get you back for a house concert.
That sounds great.
To do a Lisa.
Yep.
Lisa event.
Yeah.
Which would be nice.
Yeah.
Wow. I think I want to end it there because it's such a beautiful note. It really is. I normally ask people at the end of this, because this is the Be Bold podcast, I ask what it means to that person to be bold. But I think you've already answered that with all your heart, and you just have an amazing story. Yeah. You really do. Yes. And I feel really honored to have you here.
Thank you
Today. And all those wonderful words that you've just said, just about being kind and precious to people.
Yeah.
It's really great.
We got to do it. It.
I'll add all your information in the show notes.
Okay.
And thanks so much for coming today. The two of us here. Crying. But really, thank you so much. Thanks for wearing your heart on your sleeve and just being so open, just to chatting and sharing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
I have to admit that this conversation has stuck with me like none other that I've had for this podcast. I've thought about it every day since we recorded. As Laura says, she still wavers between wanting to love everything about this world and wondering when it will end. It's really difficult for me to hear someone whom I've admired for so long consider wanting to kill herself. But through it all, I hear her optimism and intention to pull herself up and out of that darkness. I hope you'll take a moment to go to her GoFundMe page and help her record her next CD. I, for one, am so excited to hear it. A reminder that if you like what you hear on this podcast, please take a moment to subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And if you're on an iPhone, all you have to do is click on that little purple podcast icon and search for Be Bold. Please do share this episode with anyone whom you think might enjoy it. Post it to social media or send to someone in an email or text. And for you Laura Love fans, let's get the word out about Laura coming out of retirement to start recording again. You can find out more about me by visiting wanderlustandlipstick.com. You'll find show notes and all of my podcast episodes on beboldpodcast.com. If you feel like being bold yourself, you can join me on one of my tours. Right now, I've got spots available on Tanzania, and that includes a safari and Kilimanjaro trek. We've got space on Papua New Guinea, as well as culinary tours to Santa Fe and Seattle. You'll find all of those on wandertours.com. If you'd like to connect with me, you can friend me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. Sign up for my newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site, and you'll receive a series of tips for making your travels safer. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.